Hello and welcome to the Joyful Rebels podcast, where rebellion meets wellness. We've got Claire and Donna Thomas here, your mother daughter duo, and we're here to bring you our insight, some science, and maybe some laughs
Hmm.
in our shared pursuit of finding more peace, more joy, and, of course, balance in our physical and mental health. Thank you so much for listening, for joining us today as we share some practical tips to empower you on your journey to living your best life. Now, for today, we have our newest episode of Ask the Joyful Rebels, where you ask and we answer. And this week, we're digging in deeper one more time on this topic of friendship. So we're just going to, call it, we're ending our trifecta of friendship. And so if you joined us the past two episodes, you know that at first we talked about discussing our roles, identifying our roles that we play in our friendships, in those relationships, both what we currently do and the roles we want to have. Like, hey, shine a light on your current relationships. Are you showing up how you want to show up? So
Mhm.
that felt good. That was interesting, kind of peeking back through the curtain, checking in on your relationships. Then we decided to talk about the how. How can we build and maintain these close relationships that we have? We talked about all those benefits that there are to friendship mentally, emotionally, even on a physiological level, having those friends helping you, calm down, reduce stress. And that if you've ever told yourself in your life, I don't have time for friends, I'm fine without them, we've all been there.
Mhm.
It's okay. But it is worth something to put your time and effort in. It's benefit to you. So today, finally, we're going to talk about the dark side, maybe the shadow side, if you will, of friendship. We thought it'd be a nice way to wrap up this topic. And so today, we're going to talk about what happens when friendships end. So, Mom, I wonder if you can start us off kind of putting some more texture around that topic and maybe even why we wanted to delve into it.
Hmm. Well, I appreciate when the topics bring themselves up. And we had in the investigating and what we know to be true, even in our different generations, friendship is a thing. And as women, it can take a hit, especially in the life stages that we can go through with work and with family and just the how it is. So it's an interesting state of the union. And looking at all the great benefits that we have, the scientist mind is like, well, if there's this kind of benefit, there's got to be something happening at this end too. And sure enough, there was that. It makes sense that if we talk about a subject or we come up with the topic, it starts showing up in our lives. So for me, I was looking in the rearview mirror a bit more at friendship, and the question dawned on me, like, again, why is it that we most of the time have some at least clear closure in a relationship that's romantic based, but not so much, or maybe not even nearly as much in friendships. And I think that looking at that data, there's some challenges to it that we'll get into in a minute, but it left a question and a way to just live in the space and go like, well, what does that look like? And I think we would be doing a disservice if we talked about friendship if we didn't look at the whole life cycle. And who hasn't had a relationship that was strong and healthy, and then either petered out, or there was an event that happened, and we're people and we're dynamic and we're complex, and the way to make understand it. I just love that we live in a time where we can get access to more of the research that says, hey, we've looked at this and we've studied it and we've gotten more information on how people show up, like even some from the last couple of episodes, how people show up, what are the roles, but also what does it look like when it comes to a logical end? And then finally, what can we do about it?
Mm.
So we're always going to end with a couple of action items. But what I loved in this part, Claire, is like looking at how are we as friends? What does it mean as a friendship? So not even just how we show up individually, but what does it look like? Because now we have an interplay between a couple of different people. And I think there's a lot of really interesting information there. And I love the plant analogy. I think that is so, it's you, but B, it makes so much sense as you guys are listening now, just to open your ears and see which one of these things fits you. So what are we talking about here, Claire? How are we going to parse this out?
Well, so mom, I love that you shared this article with me because so this is something by Dr. Gina Schneider, and she's talking about um, how each of us approaches friendship in a very different way, right? And we have different levels of requirements, so maybe different levels of contact that we want
Yeah.
to establish or have with people in these relationships, and different types of maintenance. And so she divides these types of relationship preferences into three different plant types. And so, mom, again, you sent me this article, and I'm like, scrolling. Yes, no, this topic is great. We were talking about this, and then I get to the plant part. I'm like, okay, I see why you sent me this. But I think it makes a lot of sense. So again, as I'm going to read out these three different types of relationship preferences for friendship, see where you fall into it. So the first one is a succulent. So these individuals' friendships would require very little maintenance. They like a lot of light, tell it to me straight, not a lot of fluffy BS in there, and very little water. So maybe there doesn't need to be a lot of extra conversation in there. These relationships grow slowly and steadily, and even in harsh environments. So have a think like where you're going to fall along this. So that's succulent then. The
Okay.
second type of relationship preference would be like a tree. So for these people who identify as a tree person in friendships, um, after the first couple years of the friendship, those are very important critical times. You're probably going to have a lot of contact during those time. There's the staking and the seeding, and there's fertilizer and water happening. So there's a lot of time and effort, and you will, in real life happening in these relationships with these people that allow the friendships to grow really strong. And that's the thing, you're establishing these deep roots. And so you get to know each other really well in the beginning so that your friendship can become what we would call established. So then,
Hmm.
as time goes on, not as much maintenance is required. Your friendship grows deeper as the years pass, but it's just that through line. You've got those roots. So even if you don't have as much contact and conversation, the friendship is still really strong. So think about, evaluate if you've got any of those type of friendships, or if that feels like that's something that you can relate to. And then the third type would be what Dr. Schneider calls the flower garden. So in these relationships, these people require frequent weeding, pruning, fertilizing, and replanting. So if too much time passes, the weeds kind of start to take over and the flower garden disappears. And this one for me was pretty eye opening because I feel like, yes, I would say for all three of these, I've had friendships that's checked all these boxes. And just a little side note before we really talk about how we feel personally about these. I just moved. Okay. So if you're watching on YouTube, you might notice a different background. And one of the big things I had to move were all of my plants. And so I really got to evaluate the needs of my plants in these moves because we had a couple weeks in between moves. So I had to think, okay, what plants are okay if, I'm not watering them all the time? Right, more of the succulent type. Okay, which ones do I know I can bring them over to this
Hmm.
house early and let them live there, and they're going to still be okay. They're going to be around. They're going to get some rainwater, but they don't need that constant attention. Then I had some of the bigger plants that could actually go in the bed of the truck, and they could really withstand the highway winds as we were going because they had these really deep root systems. And again, I could trust them to be okay. And then I had my more dainty flowers, which those took a lot more of my time and energy and attention to make sure they made it over here okay. There's still benefits to having them, right? They're beautiful to look at, but it required more of my here and now attention. I had to put them in boxes, they had to go inside my car, so they had to have that special space. I couldn't move them over early when it made most sense time wise because if I left them alone for a couple of days, they'd dry up, they would die. And so it was funny having to have to parse out all my plans. Where are you at? And then to get this article and be able to think, okay, this is interesting to look at where I'm at with friendships. Because, mom, I'm interested where you fall on these, but I'll say for me, I have probably most of my friendships I would consider that succulent phase where we acknowledge that we are busy people, but we still put in that time. We still want to have the conversations. I have actually several relationships that I would consider these tree relationships because I would say that the friends that I made like in college, I still would call them my best
Hmm.
friends. Like I talk about them to my kids. all the time, even though we haven't seen each other maybe for years. And, it's one of the positive things about social media, right? Like I can
Mhm.
be able to, talking about plants again, but my friend Nick from college, he had this beautiful monstera, and so we're messaging over Instagram. So, but when I read this article, and I said, yeah, that's like a tree friend, because it's still, the roots are deep. It doesn't take that much maintenance. It's well established. And then the flower garden, which again, when I was talking about it, we talk about that they're resource intensive, but I want to say that there are still the benefits of having that type of relationship. Um, it honestly, in my opinion, those relationships I would sometimes would consider more difficult, because
Mhm.
again, if I'm looking at my time and my energy, and if someone needs more of that, at certain stages of my life that was easier, at certain stages of my life that's harder. So none of these are the gold standard that you have to be this certain way at all. It's just an interesting, like, where are you at? So mom, I'm curious, just what's your take on these different types, maybe where you fall, or if you're looking at your relationships where they fall.
Hmm. Yeah, well, no surprise for for somebody who claims to be a self-described introvert. I'm more of a succulent. I just am. But not solely. I think I fall pretty much closely where you are, Claire. That there's that quick hit. There's the enough to establish a relationship. I feel good. I think some of that is maybe for both of us. We're clear communicators, and also do the best that when we hear, even if it's brief bits of conversation, that we take it for what it is, not being like, what do they really mean about that? What are
Mm,
they trying to
mhm,
say? Like, just
mhm.
take it for what it is. And so that's even establishing a ground rule for me in relationships, is like, I say what I mean what I say. I don't mean that in a harsh way. That's not an excuse for being harsh, but you don't have to guess with me. Pretty much. I do my best to be like, that's exactly what I'm thinking and feeling. So hopefully that allows me to cultivate more succulent and then even the tree type of relationships, because of that understanding of where I'm at. Although I gotta say, in earlier and decades before, I had more problems with my friendships because I didn't understand that piece of it. And I wasn't as thoughtful about my communication, and I wasn't as clear. And I wasn't as clear because I wasn't clear with myself.
Mm,
So I think that's a really big kicker. Again, we always kind of circle back to you got to know yourself. But knowing myself in this way allows me to attract and maintain and let certain relationships flourish, because we know what our ground rules are. We have an idea what the other person needs, and you can trust that. But then again, I feel like the tree as well, where there's some great relationships that I've had that have super deep roots. Or I haven't seen them for years either, Claire, but it's like you talk to them or you have messaging, and it's like time has not passed.
yeah.
I'm interested in what they're doing now. I'm happy that they're having these lives outside of what we shared. I'm grateful for the time we shared, and those feel good. Those feel longer term to me, and I love having those in my life. But I gotta say, flower garden, mm-mm. I don't know if that's a product of not having a bunch of time, but for me, I think the language I would have used, and this probably isn't even fair. Again, I'm saying that it probably isn't even fair that I would classify that as being more needy. Again, not fair, but that's how my brain would interpret that. That's too many touch points for what I'm willing to give. And because I don't feel it, I don't understand it. But if that's how you're hardwired, then you want to have friends that understand you, or and are cool with that tempo of relationship, at least for a time period. So I'm not saying that how I'm thinking and feeling is any better, but I can recognize that if I'm true to myself and I know myself, I'm more comfortable in having fewer touch points, but having deeper conversations. And when people need more frequent touch points, I generally don't have the time or the patience or the bandwidth to invest in that. And that could be a stage of my life. But knowing that, I'm going to wrap it up in that piece and say, I'm not going to judge myself for that in a way that is like, what's wrong with me that I'm not cultivating those relationships? Because there's so many people that, and if I have a better idea, and I start to jive with somebody, then we know if we are have some of the same needs, it's going to be easier, and there's going to be some organic peace in a
Mhm.
relationship that will allow for it to grow. So that is, I think, I want to say strategy. I'm not thinking about it, but that does make sense to me. And I have common sense in that area and feel good about meeting a ton of people, but who I engage with further, we're a little bit more similar on some of the needs there. Is that making sense?
Yeah, and what does it come to again, like you said, the knowing yourself. And I think again, what we talked about last episode too, the more you know yourself, the better you are at setting boundaries. So
Yeah.
you're aware of the amount of time and energy that you're going to put into it. And so to go back to my real life flower situation, 2, 3 years ago, I had many more flowers and it was very time consuming.
Mm.
And it was actually a conscious decision this summer that I wanted to invest more of my time in the hardier plants that maybe had different needs, still had needs, but different needs. And I think you're right. A lot of it is what stage of your life you're in. Because I would say more of my flower garden friends, that was when was younger and just
Hmm.
had more bandwidth to be able to do that. But again, at the time, I can even think of some friendships that I had going all the way back to high school where um, they didn't feel very good. But when I'm reflecting on it, there was a lack of thoughtful, clear communication on my part. Like I was just,
Mm.
oh, this is what it is. I'm just along for the ride. So I think one of the benefits of knowing yourself better, again, really driving it home, and one of the benefits of just getting older and wiser, right, is I know more of what I want, who I want, who I want to spend and share my time with. And I like how you said that if you can just even have a couple things in common with someone that organically things just click. So that's why I think it's really lucky and I'm grateful when there's some parents from my kids' sports teams that I happen to get along with. It's like, oh, cool,
Yeah.
convenient that I already was close, like, vicinity, because vicinity does matter where are you spending your
Yes.
time. But then to also have those couple things that we can get along. So I think that, to call, like, it's interesting to look at where our friendships are at now, but just knowing that moving forward, yes, we can analyze and know and reflect that friendships have ended, but to know that it's okay that they've ended, right, Mom? I know that we were saying
Yeah.
that, it's normal, right?
I used to feel bad about that. I used to feel badly that if, especially when you guys are in sports, that you spend time, or if you have an activity, if you have kids and your kids are in activities, you do just spend extra time with those parents. Generally speaking, I mean that's a thing. And then when your kids are no longer in that activity or that school or that whatever, then it's not an easy fix to see those people anymore that you might have had genuine affection for. And so when that kind of just fades away and just kind of like vapors, it just kind of goes away. I used to feel really badly about that, like try to own that. I'm like, no, that's a thing. That's a thing. People move away, they drift away, and terribly saying, but it's true, they pass away too. People go out and away, and that's not something that we have to take ownership for, unless you know deep down in your heart that you're like something happened there, and then maybe you want to have a conversation. But there's a whole bunch of my relationships that have fall into that category of they just kind of drifted, and that was just a life stage. Now that I'm on
Mhm.
this side of it, I'm like, well, I can totally see that that was just a life stage and a necessary one. You need those people in the trenches with you when you're going through those things. And so like maybe my needs for what I would consider a friend were a little bit different back then, but awesome, and I think fondly of those people. And so I like that the loss of some friendships is normal. I mean, and that's
Normal.
one big takeaway for the conversation. One other thing I wanted to say, you said it really well too, as we go back and forth with the boundaries thing, knowing yourself so you could even state that. That's for my when I get a chance to talk to friends, whether they're new friends or getting closer, that I'm like, hey, I'm not a texter after 8:30 at night. Like I don't contribute to a conversation then, but I will be right there at like 6 o'clock in the morning answering you back. So yeah, so people know that about me. So it's not like it's just hanging in the balance and I'm just, not responding back. But I'm like, I'm consciously not wanting to have conversations because I'm trying to focus on home.
Yeah.
So I've made that decision. When people then, need to send me a message and they know they're not going to hear from me, they're not going to take it personally because I've already said it. I've already said you're not going to hear from me. Like 9 times out of 10. As long as you guys, I know where you guys are in my world, I don't text back. I don't even look at it. Sometimes I've got my phone put away, so I don't even want to see it. So that has been a huge game changer for me to stay true to myself on that. So that was having a boundary and being able to communicate it. So going back to the loss is normal. I don't want you guys to feel badly when you have relationships that break for whatever reason. It's part of being the human experience. It really is. The loss is normal. Also, one thing that we can do is like not take it personally, especially for the drifty ones. You can't take responsibility for that. And I think as women, Claire, you tell me if this rings true at all. And it could be just my own lens. As women, I just want to, I want to take on as much as I can because then I can influence it and I can control it.
Mm.
Anybody? Anybody? Yeah, yeah, okay. So when I do that, I then make myself more important in a relationship than it really is. That's really what it is. I'm giving myself more of the responsibility for it, and then I'm feeling like worse about it,
Yeah.
but all that's false. Like I put
Mhm.
myself in a distorted positioning. Like, so I'm not going to take it personally again, unless I know something happened. And those are not the norm. Sometimes you have a falling out. Sometimes you change, like your needs change, your life situation, like you just, and that can happen too. That can happen with people. You own what you can, and then you let that go. But that's not something that like because the psychological uh, challenges of having a broken relationship or an ending of a relationship is that it can make you feel badly.
Mhm.
However, the people when we can bounce back a lot sooner when we take that non-judgmental stance, which isn't like I didn't do anything wrong, I've got no skin in the game, but you just look at it and you're like, take it for what it is. What was true? Were you honest and were you in the relationship as best as you could have been at that time? Like give yourself some grace there. Know what you want like better when you are moving forward or different. Like having that lesson learned allows us to go into the future with a little finer skill set, and it allows us to recover faster from the friendships that are no longer. Because it doesn't mean that they didn't happen. They happened. We got out of it. We had fond memories of it, but the friendships don't have to be forever. So let me kind of bring us home with this. I had two conversations, two different ones within the last like 3 weeks before we even knew we were going to talk about this specifically. That two friends who have big friend circles, big ones, and ones that have long histories. So like you got your neighborhood friends, you got your grade school friends. I'm like, oh my gosh, I don't even know if all mine are still alive. High school, uh, college, um, uh, preschool, like they had just different sets. These weren't like intersecting at all. They were all different sets. And what both of these people said, which it may not be representative, but it was an interesting thought that stopped me in my tracks, that they felt that I would have thought that is the goal. That's the goal. You got people all through your life. You got them all wrapped like that is the way you have just cultivated all these rich relationships. And that could be a part of it. They were reporting that they felt stress because that was a lot of people to juggle. To our earlier episodes, that was a lot of roles to play. That was a lot of time to devote to these that maybe aren't the primary relationships in their life anymore. And then you add in all the different behavioral styles and relationship styles south and the way it just felt a lot and was causing stress. So the bottom line for me is that I don't want to look at this romantically, where it's like this is the way that it should be. I'm not going to compare my friendships with somebody else who has like more of them. It's how satisfying they are to you. And so the language that I use is not that, hey, I've only got these. It's like I've got a handful of really good ones.
Mhm.
The language isn't we just have to text in our friendship now because we don't have time to see each other. It's like I am so grateful we have a digital method and a way to stay connected. And so how we speak to ourselves continues to matter. And it matters a lot in this really shifting dynamic, sometimes growing, sometimes ebbing, but this space that is fraught with all kinds of feelings and behaviors and ways that we have shown up in the world and ways that we will. So if we can give ourselves some grace here, we're going to continue to have friends. They're going to come in and out. It's going to be fluid. And they're going to enrich our lives, and we're going to do the same for them. Any thoughts on that, Claire?
Yeah, I think you gave me a great idea to add to our to do for this coming week. So if you're listening, I think uh absolutely take a few minutes to reflect on your relationships that you have. You know, are the succulent type? Do you have some trees? Do you have some flower gardens in there? But I think what's interesting is maybe you're journaling this, maybe you're saying it out loud or in your head in the car, you know, whatever. But mom, you just brought up a really great point about language. So I think when you're describing these current relationships that you have, really focus on the language. And if you're saying things like I only have, right there, X that out and then replace it. I have. I'm excited to have, I'm thankful to have, instead of I only text, I get to text. Like, let's really hone in on the language there because that can cause a huge shift in mindset about how we're looking at our relationships. And so, this is our third week talking about friendship. We talked about the roles that we played. We talk about how to build and maintain it. And today we talked about what happens when those friendships end. But also, again, just really looking through the lens at the friendships that we have now. And so, you're going to reflect on your friendships that you have. You're going to focus on the language. See if there's any quick and simple ways that you can change the way that you talk about the friendships that you have. And lastly, let's celebrate the ones that are still going strong. So whether you want to send someone a text or, you know, like one of their pictures, you know, do something to send some positive vibes that way to a friendship that you've got going. And speaking of friendships that are still going strong, you who are listening, thank you
Hmm.
for being a joyful rebel with us, for coming along on this journey. We so appreciate when you're listening.
Hmm.
And until next time, rebels.